Today we're going to see which Space Marine Dreadnoughts have the best firepower in Warhammer 40k. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where today we're doing a bit more math hammer, and we're going to see which Dreadnoughts perform best at range, both versus anti-tank and anti-infantry targets. First we'll talk about which ones I've chosen to compare and why I picked them, and then look at our damage output and durability for both anti-tank and anti-infantry dreads. So first let's strap a bunch of anti-tank ballistic missiles and laser cannons to our walking sarcophagi and let them loose on some enemy vehicles. So first up, the Dreadnoughts that I chose to compare for anti-armor duties are Relic Contemptors. I wanted to have a look at both the Volkite Culverins and multi-melters for these. I know you can switch out for las cannons, which would do us a little bit better against heavy armor, toughness 8 things, but as the multi-melters cost so much less, they're likely to be more points efficient against the majority of targets. We also have a Leviathan Dreadnought armed with grav bombards and Volkite weaponry. I did compare it to the Cyclone Melter Lancers. I generally felt that this one was a much better take-all-comers loadout. It's a lot cheaper, has far longer range, does very nearly as much damage, and far more against infantry targets if you have to fire at them. We then have a Deredeo Dreadnought, which I've equipped with the Plasma Carronade and Heavy Bolters. 6 shots at Strength 8, AP-3 and Damage 3 are likely to put a hurt on tanks. We've got a standard Venerable Dreadnought armed with Missile Launcher and Multi-Melter. Point for point, the Venerable Dreadnought does slightly outperform the standard Dreadnought in terms of sheer damage output and durability, so I thought we'd go for that over the standard one, though of course the numbers will be very similar. Again, with that one you could go for the more classic las cannon and missile launcher loadout. It'll cost you a few more points, but you'll be a bit better against toughness 8 and longer range. Finally, we have the Primaris option, the Redemptor Dreadnought with Macroplasma Incinerator, Onslaught Gatling Cannon and Icarus Pod. Let's run some numbers then and see how these guys get on. So here we have the average number of wounds on a bunch of different vehicles, and also on some heavy infantry targets, intercessors and aggressors. Out of all the Dreadnought options, point for point, it's really the Leviathan Dreadnought with the bombards that cleans up and takes first prize compared with all the others. Whether it's firing at infantry or vehicles, it does seem to get the most damage, provided they do have a 3+ save, and it can use its grav rule. Otherwise, going down the list from the top, the Volkite Contemptor understandably performs very well against intercessors and aggressors. It does have 16 damage 2 shots even if they have no AP, and does generate a fair few mortal wounds. Interestingly, against heavier vehicle targets, either toughness 7 with a 5+ invul or the toughness 8 vehicle, it performs pretty much equally well to the multi-melters, kind of surprising as it's a lot more of an anti-infantry machine. The multi-melter Contemptor does win out against toughness 7 vehicles in a big way compared with it though. Strength 8 and AP-4 is pretty much the ideal anti-tank with taking down the standard vehicle profile. And just to see how it compared, I also did the numbers for the Multi-Melter and Typhoon Missile Launcher Contemptor as well. If you strap the Typhoon Missile Launchers to the top, it does get a significant increase in damage per point, though of course is no more durable than the other patterns of Contemptor Dreadnought. Against vehicles for sheer damage output, this one is pretty much the runner-up to the Leviathan. In terms of damage output, the other really quite impressive choice is the Deredeo with the Plasma Carronade. Between that and its heavy bolters, it does put out a decent amount of wounds on anything from infantry to vehicles, and it does do that at longer range than the Leviathan. I would bear in mind that you do have the chance of taking mortal wounds yourself though from the Plasma Carronade when it overheats. I'm afraid compared with the competition, our standard boxy Venerable Dreadnought just doesn't shape up. I'm afraid it just doesn't particularly perform well in any categories. The Redemptor with the Macroplasmas pretty efficient against intercessors and aggressors, though not desperately so against heavier vehicles. Kind of understandable really, as quite a lot of its damage output is tied up in its close combat abilities. So that's damage output then. Let's look over at their durability and how hard they are to take down. So this is how hard it is to remove these various Dreadnoughts from the table. This chart shows the number of hits that you need to kill 100 points worth of each model, so it is weighted for points. Again though, it's pretty much a clean sweep for the Leviathan with the grav bombards. It is the toughest or equal toughest in every single category. 14 wounds, a 2+ armor save and a 5+ invul really go a long way. As a general rule, the vast majority of the Dreadnoughts are really quite similar in durability against heavy anti-tank weapons. It kind of doesn't really matter which one you take. Against things like overcharged plasma, thunderhammers and las cannons, the Dreadnoughts are fairly even, but the Leviathan will be a bit more standout against anything that's AP-2 just due to that high armor save. That's why it wins the thunderhammer category quite so well. Otherwise, with their invul saves, the Contemptors and Deredeo are a little bit more resistant to high AP things like las cannons and overcharged plasma, where the standard Venerable Dreadnought and the Redemptor Dreadnought, They're not far behind against high AP things, but do quite a lot better against the small arms fire, things like bolt rifles, heavy bolters, and autocannons. In general though, it is a clean sweep both in damage and durability for the Leviathan Dreadnought with the dual grav bombards. So now let's take a look at the anti-infantry Dreadnoughts. For these ones I've been maybe a little bit more selective. For the Leviathan Dreadnought we've gone for the storm cannons and Volkite loadouts, 240 points and 16 shots at strength 7 at AP -1. Again we have our twin Volkite Contemptor, again with 16 shots for just 150 points, not going to be too bad against infantry, and point for point it does do significantly better than any of the twin heavy bolters, autocannons or Kerry's assault cannon loadouts that you can give the Contemptor Dreadnought. For the Deredeo I've chosen to go with the Volkite Falconet. You do get a couple less shots than the twin Anvilus autocannons, but getting to strength 8 and getting the mortal wounds on top of that does mean that it's more efficient against most targets. In addition, he also has twin heavy bolters and the Aeolus missiles. They're an extra 3d3 strength 6 AP -1 shots that they put on the top of him. Last but not least, we have a Redemptor with dual Gatling cannons, a heavy onslaught one and a standard onslaught one, an Icarus missile port, and a couple of storm bolters, which are actually quite relevant when you're aiming at infantry. So in terms of anti-infantry efficiency, here we have all of our Dreadnoughts taking aim at a few infantry targets: Termagants, Battle Sisters, Orc Boys, Necron Warriors, Intercessors and Aggressors. In general for this one for me, there's two quite clear winners. The Redemptor with the Gatling cannons basically wins against any target that's one wound, and the Volkite Contemptor is really quite close behind all those one wound targets, but quite convincingly outperforms the Redemptor when you target multi-wound units. The Deredeo and the Leviathan with storm cannons both do well against intercessors as they fit quite well with their damage 2 weapons, but just aren't really all that impressive against any of the one wound infantry targets. In terms of durability of all of these guys, for the most part it's a fairly similar story to the last table. The Leviathan still wins decently against anything with AP -1 due to its high save, though against dedicated anti-tank weapons it's a far more mixed picture, with basically all of these choices of Dreadnought being fairly equally durable. For me, the winner is still slightly the Leviathan, followed by the Volkite Contemptor, Redemptor Dreadnought, and Deredeo. Of course, raw numbers and damage output aren't the only consideration when picking one of these over another. There really are quite a lot of other factors involved that the maths of damage and durability wouldn't account for. Having longer range than 24 inches is ideal if possible. Deredeos, Volkites, and the Redemptor all do fairly well out of that. The Contemptors, Venerable Dreadnoughts, and the Redemptor all get the core keyword, which makes them a bit better for forming a firebase around characters, as opposed to just going off and doing their own thing. The Relic Dreadnoughts from Forge World all have the Martial Legacy rule. They cost 1 command point in addition to everything else. If you've got abundant command points and not much to spend them on, it's not really the biggest deal, but if they are a bit tight, then that could genuinely be a cost that you might want to consider when comparing one with another. Some of the Dreadnoughts quite helpfully have the Smokescreen keyword as well. A -1 to hit against enemy shooting can be really quite nice, particularly when it's deployed on a really big hefty Dreadnought such as the Leviathans or the Deredeos. And of course the Redemptor does have a bit of an edge over the rest, as well as just being a gun platform, it can also do melee very well as well. Even if you primarily want a ranged platform, having a really nice counter-assault punch can be great. So overall, if you're looking for a ranged Dreadnought for Codex Space Marines, I think that the raw numbers of the Leviathan Dreadnought with Grav Bombard are kind of hard to turn down. Certainly not saying that he doesn't have weaknesses, such as range, the command point cost, and not being core, but one of those could be particularly nice at the centre of a battle line, just to give your opponent a threat that they really need to deal with, one that's going to take up quite a lot of punishment before it goes down. For anti-infantry purposes, I'd say the Onslaught Redemptor might well be the best. It clears chaff hordes really well, and of course it has its own melee threat. The twin Volkite Contemptor really isn't all that far behind though. It puts out better damage on Space Marines, which is very relevant at the moment, and it's a bit more of a general purpose Dreadnought, also being able to aim at tanks with some efficiency thanks to all of those high damage shots and mortal wounds. Otherwise, for another general ranged platform, I really quite like the Volkite Falconet Deredeo Dreadnoughts. Lots of decent strength, decent AP shots with a little bit of mortal wounds coming out of them as well, and they're pretty much equally threatening at a decent range versus both infantry and tanks. Of course, when taking any of these, I'd certainly be weighing up against other options. It's hard to talk about anti-tank without comparing to things like Eradicators or Tac Bikes right now. Dreadnoughts certainly aren't the only way to get things done, though they are quite a cool way. Look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments below. Please let me know if you've had any experience with these guys in game. It's always good to get a few more first-hand experiences. If you've enjoyed the video and you'd like to see more like it, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly be hoping to keep the strategy videos coming out as regularly as possible. Finally, if you have been enjoying my videos quite a bit and you'd like to help keep them coming, I would just like to mention that the channel has a Patreon page which you can find down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, such as seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next for the channel, and automatic entry to the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.